Still, the church applause rang too loud in my ears as my husband bid on a mystery guest, and my son froze beside me in fear. As I kept my face calm, I felt my fingers press into the chair, choosing silence over the scene he wanted. While the clapping echoed off the walls, I noticed how the woman at the door already knew where to look. At me, not the crowd. The same applause followed my thoughts as I realized this night wasn't about charity, but about setting a stage. That's when it clicked that he hadn't bought generosity. He'd bought a witness. Still smiling for the room, I decided I wouldn't interrupt his performance. I'd let the truth take the spotlight later. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. The church hall glowed with that artificial warmth, the string lights twinkling like stars that had been squeezed too tightly into little glass bottles. The air was thick with polite laughter and the faint scent of coffee, as if this whole evening had been choreographed to feel like one long, smiling performance. I sat beside Gavin, who played the room like it belonged to him. His posture was perfect, his smile wide and practiced, like he'd been rehearsing for days. He stood up with a slight flourish, and the room fell silent, all eyes on him. "I'll bid $20,000, he said, his voice booming, almost too loud for the moment. People around us started clapping, like holiness could really be bought. The applause felt empty, like something rehearsed. A pat on the back that wasn't meant for the cause, but for him. I didn't ask for this. The applause, the eyes on him, none of it had anything to do with me. And that's when I felt it, that cold weight on my chest. Gavin didn't even glance at me. Not once. He didn't check in to see if this bid was okay with me, if I felt comfortable with the way he was using our money. It wasn't about us. It was about his performance, about the way he wanted to be seen. To the world, he was a hero. To me, he was just controlling. Next to me, Noah fidgeted. He was already overwhelmed by the noise, his small body tense and his fingers sticky from whatever snack he'd grabbed from the table. His face was pale, his eyes darting around the room, unsure of where to focus. I wanted to reach out and pull him close, but I couldn't. Gavin's image was everything right now. The host teased the crowd about the mystery guest that was about to make her grand entrance, and I could feel Gavin's gaze flicker toward me, like he was about to deliver the punchline to a joke only he understood. "Try not to make this weird, Rachel," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. His words stung, sharp and quick, as if I was the one who could ruin everything, as if it was my fault if anything went wrong. But it wasn't me. It was him. Always him. I sat there, my fingers curling around the edge of my chair, the wood pressing against my palms. Gavin had built this little world for himself, and I was just a backdrop, silent, secondary. Then she walked in, Tessa, the mystery guest. The moment she stepped through the door, Noah froze. His small frame tensed. His eyes wide with something I couldn't name at first. Fear? Recognition? I didn't know, but his body was rigid, his breath quickening. He looked like he might faint. "No, no, no," he whispered, over and over, his voice shaking. I pulled him into me, wrapping my arms around him, but nothing seemed to calm him. His fear was so raw, so real. And Gavin just squeezed my arm tighter, his fingers digging into my skin. "Stop it," he hissed. "You're making this worse." I didn't respond. What was there to say? His reaction, my son's reaction, didn't matter. Not to Gavin. He was more concerned about how it looked to others. I felt Tessa's eyes on me then, direct, knowing. It made my skin crawl. Today I understand that look now. She wasn't just a guest. She was part of something much bigger. And I was just starting to realize how deep this was going to go. The room fell silent the moment Tessa stepped through the door. It wasn't just her appearance, it was the way she entered, like she belonged, like she had always been part of this space. Her hair was perfectly styled, her smile flawless, radiating that calm confidence I'd always wished I could fake. She wasn't just a guest at this event, she was the center of it. And as she walked in, I saw Noah. His face went pale as paper. His small hands gripped the edge of the chair like it was the only thing holding him together. His wide eyes locked onto her, and in that moment, everything about him screamed fear. And then it happened. A scream. At first, it was just a sharp, quiet cry, more of a whimper, but it echoed in my chest like a gunshot. "No, no, no!" Noah's voice cracked, his little body trembling. His arms shot up to his face, as if trying to shield himself from something he couldn't explain. I turned quickly, instinctively reaching for him, pulling him into my lap, desperate to comfort him. But his body was rigid with terror, shaking violently. I could feel the warmth of his breath against my dress, his small form trembling like a leaf caught in the wind. Gavin was beside me in an instant. His hand grabbed Noah's shoulder too roughly, his fingers digging into the soft skin. "Stop it," he hissed, low enough so only I could hear. "Stop it, Noah." I felt the sting of his words, cold, dismissive, like Noah's fear wasn't a real emotion but an inconvenience. To Gavin, it wasn't a child's fear, it was misbehavior. I could feel Noah's tiny body shaking in my arms, and it broke something in me. How could Gavin not see this? How could he be so harsh with our son, just because of some childish reaction? But that wasn't the worst of it. It was the way he looked at me, the way he expected me to fix it, to control Noah's emotions like I could just wave a magic wand and make it all go away. "Don't make it worse," Gavin muttered, his eyes on me now. His voice was calm, almost patronizing, like I was the problem. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned my attention back to Noah. He kept muttering those words, his face buried against my dress. "No, no, no." I held him tighter, wishing I could erase whatever nightmare he was seeing, but it was when I looked up that I felt it. The way Tessa was staring at me, not just looking, but looking through me. Her eyes were steady, calculating, like she knew something about us. About me. Her gaze lingered, just a moment too long, and it felt wrong. Like she was stepping into a world she had no business being in. Today, I understand what I didn't then. Tessa wasn't just a random guest. She was placed there for a reason, and Noah knew it. He wasn't just scared of her. He was scared of what she represented. And I was starting to realize that this wasn't just some innocent charity event. It was the beginning of something much darker. The minivan was too quiet. The only sound was the hum of the engine and Noah's quiet sobs from the back seat. The faint smell of church coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the salt of his tears. Every so often a streetlight flashed across Gavin's rigid face, illuminating the tension in his jaw. He stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from snapping. Noah sat quietly behind me, clutching his seatbelt with a tightness that made his knuckles white. His eyes were glued to the window, but he wasn't looking at anything. He was trying to disappear into the darkness, away from whatever had shaken him tonight. Finally, Gavin broke the silence. His voice was low, cutting through the stillness. "You baby him too much," he said. "You make him anxious." The words stung, but I didn't let him see that. I turned slightly, glancing back at Noah, who was still lost in his own world, trembling with quiet fear. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He's a kid, Gavin," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's scared, and you're blaming me?" "Yeah, well, you can't coddle him forever," Gavin shot back, his tone dismissive. "You've been doing it for years, Rachel. Look where it's gotten us." I felt a sharp wave of anger, but I swallowed it down. I didn't want to fight with him right now, not in front of Noah, but I couldn't help it. Gavin's control over everything, over us, was starting to feel unbearable. "Maybe he wouldn't be so scared if you were there for him," I muttered under my breath, but I knew Gavin wasn't listening. He never did. Noah's eyes remained fixed on the window, and I couldn't help but feel a deep ache in my chest. His little body was so small, so fragile, and here we were, stuck in this mess. The world outside the window was nothing but a blur of streetlights and shadows, but Noah wasn't looking at any of it. He wasn't looking at anything. I shifted in my seat and turned toward Gavin. "Who is Tessa?" I asked, my voice quieter this time. What was all that about tonight? He didn't even blink. His eyes stayed locked on the road, and he replied too quickly, almost nervously. "No one. It's for the auction." His answer didn't sit right with me. I could hear the lie in his voice, feel the distance he was putting between us. But I didn't press him, not yet. Not while Noah was still so visibly shaken. When we pulled into the driveway, Gavin was already out of the car before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt. Inside, he immediately locked his phone, slipping it into his jacket pocket like it was some kind of secret weapon. "You're overthinking," he said, his tone as cold as ever. "You always do this." I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, letting the weight of his words sink in. I had spent years questioning myself, doubting everything I saw, and now it felt like I was losing myself completely. Today, I understand what I didn't then. Gavin wasn't just controlling the situation. He was controlling me, and I had let it happen for too long. The morning light poured through the kitchen window, harsh and bright, like interrogation lighting. It caught every corner of the room, every detail I wished I could ignore. Gavin sat at the table, stirring his coffee with a spoon. The sound was too loud, the clink of metal against porcelain filling the silence between us. Noah sat quietly at the table, pushing his cereal around in circles, his small face pinched. He hadn't said much since last night, and I wasn't sure what to say to him either. I could feel the weight of the night still hanging in the air, suffocating the room. Gavin finally broke the silence. "You packed Noah's lunch wrong," he said, his voice casual, like it was the most important thing in the world. I froze, my hand still hovering over the cutting board, knife in hand. "What?" He didn't even look up from his coffee. "The sandwich," he said, as if it was obvious. "It's not cut right. Diagonal, Rachel. Diagonal." My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the first time he'd corrected something so small, something so pointless. It was always something, always an opportunity to make me feel inadequate. I didn't say anything. I just sliced the sandwich the way he wanted, feeling the sting of the correction. It wasn't just about the sandwich. It never was. The clink of Gavin's spoon echoed again in the silence. "About last night," he said, almost casually. "Noah had a tantrum. That's all." I looked up, my heart lurching in my chest. "A tantrum?" My voice wavered, but I couldn't help it. "Gavin, he was terrified. You saw it." He shrugged, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "It's nothing. He's just dramatic. You baby him too much, Rachel. It's your fault he gets like this." The words hit me like a slap, sharp and stinging. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. I couldn't fight over this, not in front of Noah. He didn't need to hear it. Instead, I kept my eyes on the counter, focusing on the task in front of me, the sandwich now in pieces. I cleared my throat. "Where did you meet Tessa?" I asked, trying to sound casual like it didn't matter, but I could feel the tension building between us, thick and suffocating. He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked up to meet mine for a moment, then quickly dropped back to his coffee. "A church connection," he said too quickly. "It's not important." But it was important. Everything felt wrong. I pressed on, ignoring the knot forming in my stomach. "Why was she there, Gavin? Why did you request her?" He shifted in his seat, his face hardening. "You're overthinking this, Rachel. It's for the auction. It's nothing." But something in me snapped. I grabbed my phone and called the auction coordinator. When she picked up, I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm just trying to get some details about Tessa. Was she a random guest?" Her voice faltered slightly. "No, she wasn't random. Gavin specifically requested her. She was brought in for the event. And..." We were asked to keep the details confidential. I hung up the phone, the weight of her words sinking into my chest like a stone. I turned to Gavin, the question hanging in the air. "What's going on?" I whispered. His eyes darted away, and I saw the lie in his gaze. "You're imagining things," he muttered. "Stop. You're stressing over nothing." But I wasn't imagining it. Today, I know what I didn't then. Gavin had orchestrated this whole thing, and I was just starting to realize how deep the lie went. I sat in my car, the engine still running, my hands shaking as I stared at the phone screen in front of me. The transfer details on the bank's app blurred together, my eyes refusing to focus. I'd been staring at the numbers for what felt like hours, but nothing made sense. I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones, that growing sense of dread I couldn't shake. I took a deep breath and called the bank's business department, my fingers cold as I dialed the number. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. "How can I assist you today, ma'am?" "I need to confirm some transactions," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "There's a vendor listed in the auction paperwork. I need to know more about them." The rep didn't hesitate, but there was a slight edge to her tone when she responded. "I can look that up for you. One moment, please." I gripped the phone, the silence between us making the tension in my chest feel unbearable. The sound of the keyboard clacking in the background felt like it was coming from a different world, far away. I couldn't focus on anything but the knot tightening in my stomach. When she came back on the line, I could hear it. The shift in her tone. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I felt it. "Ma'am." "There's some confusion," she said. "The vendor is a shell company. There's no further information available beyond the contact details." I blinked, my heart skipping a beat. "A shell company?" I repeated, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "Yes, ma'am. And the contact details, well, they match a number listed in your account. It's registered to someone named Tessa." Tessa? My stomach dropped. The mystery guest. The one who had terrified Noah. I suddenly felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I tried to steady my breath. "Tessa," I whispered. "The same Tessa from the auction?" "Yes," she said. "It seems the contact information is the same. That's what I have." Everything crashed together in that moment. Noah's reaction at the auction, Gavin's secrecy, the strange way he'd been dismissive of my concerns. It all made sense now in the worst way possible. Tessa wasn't just some random guest. She was placed there, on purpose. And Gavin had been behind it all. He didn't just bid on a mystery guest. He'd orchestrated the whole thing. He had paid to bring someone into our lives, someone who could manipulate the story, someone who could be the witness he needed if things went wrong. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the revelation pressed down on me, making my chest feel like it was caving in. I fumbled for my phone, dialing Lena's number. My hands were clammy, my mind racing as I waited for her to pick up. "Lena," I whispered when she answered. "I think he's building a story about me." There was a pause, then her voice. Steady and sure. "Then we build the truth first." I let her words settle over me, like a breath of fresh air. Lena was right. This wasn't just about a mystery guest or an auction. This was about control, manipulation, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. I sat in the car, the phone pressed to my ear, my fingers shaking as I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm calling about Tessa," I said to the receptionist at Noah's school, trying to sound calm. "She was listed as a volunteer for a school event last month. Can you confirm if she had campus access?" There was a long pause before the receptionist replied, her voice a little too cautious. "She was listed briefly," she said, hesitation thick in her words. "Briefly?" I echoed, leaning against the steering wheel. The weight of the conversation starting to press down on me. "What do you mean, briefly?" "She was on the list for a short period of time," the receptionist continued, her tone now careful, like she was trying to avoid saying too much. "But she's not listed anymore. My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to push for more information, but I could already hear the walls going up. I swallowed hard, feeling a surge of frustration. "Why was she removed from the list?" I asked, unable to mask the sharpness in my voice. "I'm afraid I can't give you that information," she said, her voice now clipped, final. I hung up the phone, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. Something wasn't right, and every instinct in me screamed that I was missing something crucial. But it wasn't enough to make me feel confident. Instead, it just made me feel like I was being paranoid. The receptionist had made me feel small, as if I was overreacting, as if my concerns weren't valid. I pulled myself together only to check my phone and see a new text from Gavin. "Don't bother the school. You'll look unstable." I stared at the words, my chest tightening. It was typical of him, always dismissing me, always making me feel like I was the problem. I fought the urge to throw the phone across the car, but the sting of his words was already settling into my skin, his control tightening around me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. That afternoon, as I picked Noah up from school, his teacher approached me with a worried look. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low. "Tessa, the volunteer, she asked some strange questions when she was here." I leaned in, heart hammering. "What kind of questions?" "She wanted to know about Noah's routine. Who picks him up if he gets scared at home?" the teacher said, glancing around as if she was afraid someone might overhear. It just felt off. At first, I didn't think much of it, but now, I don't know. "I thought you should know." I felt a chill run down my spine. My mind raced as I processed her words. Why would she ask those things? That night, Noah woke up in a panic. He was drenched in sweat, his small body trembling as he whispered, "She smiled when she scared me." I held him tight, feeling the sharp edge of fear run through me. Who was this woman? What had she done to my son? I couldn't even begin to understand it, but I knew one thing for sure. Gavin had been behind it all. I held him until my arms ached, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Today, I know what I didn't then. Tessa wasn't just a random guest. She was planted in our lives, and Noah's fear was part of a much bigger plan I had yet to unravel. The file opened on my screen like a cold clinical document, too sterile, too methodical to be real. I stared at the template in front of me, my breath catching in my throat. The phrases jumped out at me, each one more chilling than the last. Erratic, emotionally unstable, unfit. They were all neatly bullet-pointed, as if this was a strategy memo, a clinical assessment of my every human reaction, my attempts to fight, to feel, to understand. It had all been turned into something wrong, something that could be used against me. I felt the blood drain from my face as I scrolled down. It wasn't just a list of adjectives. It was a blueprint for a narrative, one that painted me as a threat, a woman who couldn't be trusted, a mother who wasn't fit to care for her own child. Gavin had done this. He had turned my life, my very essence, into a file of symptoms. Each of my moments of distress had been meticulously written down, twisted into something ugly. I felt a tight knot form in my chest as I read it again. The words blurred together, but the meaning was clear. Gavin had been preparing for this, preparing to present me as unfit. He wasn't just controlling me, he was controlling everything, my responses, my emotions, my very sanity. I looked at the timestamp. The file was recent, very recent. This wasn't something from years ago. This wasn't just a poorly written note or a casual remark. This was a plan, laid out meticulously, ready to be used in whatever game he was playing. I felt a wave of nausea, my hands trembling as I clicked through the document. The worst part wasn't the words themselves, but the realization of how calculated it all was. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. Tessa's name appeared at the bottom of the file, not as a guest, not as a random person, but as a witness. Her role wasn't some lover fantasy. No. Her role had sharpened into something else entirely, a credibility tool, someone who could speak with authority about my instability, about how I was a danger to our family. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. He had turned her into an asset, a weapon against me. She wasn't just a stranger who had walked into our lives. She was being used as part of a strategy, a part of his story. My heart was racing now, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sit still. My mind was screaming at me to do something, anything. I quickly snapped screenshots of the document, my fingers moving mechanically. I forwarded them to a private email account. My hands were shaking, but I felt a small flicker of something inside me. It was like I was stealing my own truth back. I was making sure this part of the story, his version of it, didn't stay hidden. I didn't know what would happen next, but I couldn't stand by and do nothing anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed Marin's number, the attorney who had been recommended to me through my company's benefits. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional. "Hello, Rachel. How can I help you?" I felt the weight of everything hit me in that moment. I think my husband is planning a case against me. I could barely hear the words as they left my mouth, but they were out there, ringing in the quiet of the room. Marin didn't say anything right away. Then slowly she spoke. "Tell me everything," she said. "We'll start from the beginning." And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt like I might have a chance. Today, I know what I didn't then. Gavin wasn't just manipulating me. He was preparing for battle, and I had to learn how to fight back. Mr. Cho's office was too quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead amplifying the tension in the air. I sat across from him, trying to steady my breath as he clicked through the bank statements on his screen. Each line of data made my stomach turn. New payees, unexplained withdrawals, accounts I didn't recognize. I focused on one particular account that was linked to our household. My heart dropped. "Who's this account for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He barely looked up from the screen. "This account is tied to both your names," he said. "It was set up recently, but there's no clear indication of what it's for." I felt a cold wave rush over me. I knew exactly whose name was listed second. Gavin. He'd done this without telling me, without any discussion. He'd set up something in secret, something that had now tied me into his web. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears as he continued. "There's also a pending request to transfer funds into a trust management account." The words hit me like a punch. "Trust management?" I echoed, the phrase sour on my tongue. "What's that about?" He shrugged, glancing at me briefly. "On paper, it's about family stability planning, but the sudden request without proper documentation, it doesn't look right." My mind raced. Family stability? Or was this just another way to lock me out, to put everything in his hands and make sure I couldn't escape? I'd seen enough to know this wasn't about protecting our family. It was about control. I pushed back in my chair, the cold leather creaking beneath me. "So, what's the pattern here?" I asked, barely holding it together. "What's really going on?" Mr. Cho didn't hesitate. "The money is being isolated. Then he's painting you as unstable, someone who can't handle finances or make decisions. The idea is to position him as the responsible one, the one people can trust." I felt a sharp sting in my chest. The pieces started to fall into place. Gavin wasn't just trying to control me at home. He was playing a bigger game. He wasn't just protecting the family. He was positioning himself as the perfect father, the perfect husband. The auction, the donations, the mystery guest, they weren't just for charity. They were a performance, a way to manipulate how the world saw him. I stared at the screen in front of me, the truth slamming into me like a freight train. He'd used everything, the money, the people, even me, to create a story. He was building a stage where he looked saintly, where I looked like the problem. The anger bubbled up, sharp and hot. I hadn't been imagining it. Gavin had been orchestrating everything. the lies, the manipulations, and I had been so focused on the surface that I hadn't seen what was happening behind the scenes. "Do you want to take legal action?" Mr. Cho asked, his voice calm, like he was offering me a choice. I didn't answer right away. My mind was still spinning. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Gavin control this anymore. I wasn't going to let him win. Today, I know what I didn't then. This wasn't just about money, it was about control. And Gavin had been controlling everything. But that was about to change. The conference room smelled of old carpet and stale coffee, the kind of smell that makes everything feel stuck in the past, like no one had bothered to clean it in years. The long table sat under harsh fluorescent lighting, casting everything in a sterile, clinical glow. People shuffled in, their footsteps soft, but I could feel the weight of their eyes. It was as if they wanted drama, wanted a story to unfold, but they feared taking any responsibility for it. Gavin was at the head of the table, already greeting everyone with that too wide, too perfect smile of his. He looked like he belonged there, in control, the center of the show. The contrast between his confident demeanor and the chaos that had been unfolding in my life was almost sickening. He was performing even here, like the world was his audience. When I walked in, I could feel the tension thickening in the air. The room seemed to collectively inhale, waiting. Gavin looked at me for just a moment before he began. "Rachel's been overwhelmed lately," he said, his voice a little too calm, a little too dismissive. The words stung, but I kept my face impassive. He was minimizing me again, turning me into a weak, emotional woman, while he played the role of the reasonable man, as if I wasn't standing right there, as if I wasn't listening to him describe me as though I were some distant problem, some inconvenience that needed managing. His casual dismissal cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Pastor Elaine, who had been silent up until then, cleared her throat, the only sound that seemed to break the heavy silence. "Gavin," she said, her voice steady but firm. "Why was the bid for the mystery guest directed to a vendor and not the church?" Gavin's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly, tightening it into something brittle. He shifted in his seat, the nervous tension that flickered across his face only visible to me. "It was a simple misunderstanding," he said, his tone calm, even rehearsed. "The funds were meant to go to the charity, but the paperwork got misdirected. I'll make sure that gets corrected." I watched the way he lied so easily, spinning the story to suit him. His words were as smooth as butter, but there was a crack in his composure that I didn't miss. He wasn't as calm as he was pretending to be. The man who had used me and our son as pawns in his twisted games was now pretending to be the very image of righteousness. Then Marin spoke up. She was calm, composed, unshaken. "If I may," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "I believe we have some documentation to go through." I had been sitting quietly until then, but Marin's words had my full attention. I could feel the shift in the room, the subtle change as the eyes turned toward her. She passed around the papers she had gathered, showing the link between the shell company Gavin had used and Tessa. The connection was undeniable. The names and numbers lined up in stark contrast to the story Gavin had been feeding everyone. There it was, the proof. Marin flipped the page to reveal the statement template Gavin had carefully crafted, the one designed to paint me as unstable, as a liability. It was all laid out so neatly, so methodically. The words erratic, emotionally unstable, and unfit appeared as if they had been pulled from a textbook on how to destroy someone's credibility. The room went still. I could feel the eyes on me, but they were different now, less dismissive, less uncertain. People stopped avoiding my gaze, and for the first time, I wasn't the one being ignored. Then Ms. Rivera spoke up, her voice soft but direct. I can confirm that a concern report was filed, and the language used in the report matches this template. It was too polished, too coordinated. I saw Deacon Holt shift uncomfortably in his chair. He looked from Gavin to me, the realization slowly dawning on him. He no longer looked at Gavin with the same loyalty, the same reverence he had before. There was a shift, a subtle crack in the facade. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The room was already doing the talking for me. Marin's presentation had done what I couldn't, exposed the truth that Gavin had been desperately trying to bury. And as the eyes of the room finally turned away from him and onto the facts, I felt something shift inside me too. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Empowerment. Today I know what I didn't then. Gavin had been controlling the narrative all along, but the truth had a way of coming to light. And now the stage had shifted. The audience was no longer buying his performance. It was my turn. The room felt too bright, the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everything feel sterile, too clinical. The low hum of the lights was the only sound, aside from the occasional shuffle of papers and the rustle of chairs, as Tessa sat across from me. She looked composed, too composed, but I could see the cracks forming. Her confident smile wasn't quite reaching her eyes. Marin spoke first, her voice cutting through the tension. We'd like to request Tessa's employment records and the details of her relationship to the vendor. Tessa's smile faltered for just a second before she straightened, her hands folding neatly on the table. I'm afraid that's confidential, she replied too quickly, too smoothly. I was hired for the event. That's all. Her answer didn't sit right with me. I could see it in the way she shifted her gaze, the tightness in her posture. She was hiding something. You were hired for the event, but you seem to know a lot more about us, about our routine, Noah's fears. Why is that? Tessa's expression froze for a moment. She cleared her throat and glanced at the others in the room. There was a flicker of hesitation before she spoke again. I don't know what you mean. I was just hired for the event. Her voice was shaking now, a small crack in the facade, but I didn't let her off the hook. You knew things about our home, about Noah. You asked about his schedule, whether he gets scared at night. That's not something a stranger should know. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes flicked from me to the others at the table, looking for some kind of support, but it wasn't there. She was losing control. I felt the vibration of my phone against my leg, but I didn't look down right away. Gavin's name flashed on the screen, and I knew what it was before I even saw the message. Stop. You're going to ruin Noah with your drama. The words were a punch to the gut. He was trying to silence me, weaponizing my love for Noah against me. I could feel the weight of the message, like 100 hands pressing down on my chest, but I didn't let him see that. I didn't let him control me. Not now. I glanced at Ms. Rivera, who had been quietly observing everything. She cleared her throat softly. Ms. Hayes is right, she said, her voice calm but firm. Noah's reaction at the auction wasn't just a typical response, it was distress, and I believe a formal safety assessment is necessary. Tessa's face paled as the words settled in the air. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, the earlier composure slipping away. She opened her mouth but didn't speak, as if trying to find the right words that wouldn't sound like a lie. I didn't need to say anything else. The room was already turning. The eyes that had once looked at me with uncertainty were now focused on Tessa. Her story was falling apart. Today I know what I didn't then. Gavin had built this whole thing, using me and our son as pawns in his game. But the truth was always there, waiting to be uncovered. And now, for the first time, I was in control. The kitchen was painfully bright, the harsh fluorescent lights above casting everything in cold, unforgiving clarity. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the faint burn of toast. Gavin sat across from me at the table, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface, as if he was preparing for something I was about to face. He'd called this a family meeting, but I could feel the weight of it already. It wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. And I was the one on trial. You need to apologize to Noah, Gavin said slowly, his voice calculated, as if explaining something to a child, for making a scene at the auction. I stared at him, my breath catching. A scene? I echoed, the words coming out in disbelief. Gavin, you saw what happened. Noah was scared, terrified. He didn't even look at me. He just kept that calm, controlled expression, like he was speaking to someone he could dismiss. You're overreacting, he said, shaking his head as if I were the problem. You scared him. You need to apologize. The words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. The tightness in my chest was almost unbearable. How was this even happening? How had he become the one to tell me what to feel? He was dismissing my legitimate concern, turning it into something I had done wrong. I reached for my phone beneath the table, my hands trembling just enough for me to notice. I hit record. I wasn't going to let him manipulate the situation, not without evidence. I had learned my lesson. I'm not the one who scared Noah, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside. You're turning this into my fault, Gavin, but you saw his reaction. He was terrified. He didn't even blink. It's not about what happened. It's about how you're handling it, he continued, his voice still too calm. You need to stop making everything about you. This is about Noah's well-being. The words were like a slap, but I held my ground. And you think making me apologize is going to fix that? His expression remained unchanged, that same controlled mask he always wore. Yes, you need to understand that Noah needs stability. He needs peace, and I'm doing everything I can to provide that. I clenched my jaw, letting the tension in my body build. Gavin had always been the one to take control, to manipulate the situation until it bent to his will. But something was different today. He was unraveling, even if he didn't realize it yet. You don't get it, do you? I asked, my voice low but firm. You're the one disrupting Noah's life, not me. I could feel the tension building in the room, but I wasn't done. I let him continue, knowing he always talked too much when he thought he had the upper hand. Then he said it. I've paid for protection, he admitted, his words coming out too easily. I'm just making sure you don't try to take Noah from me. My heart stopped. The words hit like a blow. The reality of them crashing over me. He had paid for protection because he was afraid I might take my son from him? He hadn't realized it, but he'd just exposed himself completely. The truth was out now. He was building a case, setting up the narrative, and he thought he could control everything. I looked at Noah then, sitting silently at the table, his eyes cast down, hands folded in his lap. His silence was his shield. He had learned early that when the storm came, the safest place was to remain unseen, unheard. It broke my heart. Today, I know what I didn't then. Gavin had been preparing for this moment, building his case. But now, the power was shifting. He had underestimated me, and it was time to take control. The room was small with soft lighting and the scent of lavender that seemed deliberately calming, designed to make the process easier. Noah sat across from Ms. Rivera, his small hands folded tightly in his lap. She was speaking to him gently, her voice soft as she asked him questions about what had happened, about the night of the auction, about the things he had seen and felt. I sat quietly in the corner, my hands gripping the edge of the chair, trying to be as invisible as possible. I wasn't sure how Noah was going to respond. I hadn't pushed him to talk about it, about Tessa, about the fear I could still see in his eyes, but I knew it was time. Noah's voice was small but clear when he spoke, a stark contrast to the uncertainty I had grown used to hearing from him. Tessa told me to be quiet, he said, his eyes downcast, his voice barely above a whisper. She said if I told, something bad would happen. His words felt like a punch to my chest. His childhood had already been hijacked by all of this, by a woman he had never asked for in his life. Ms. Rivera leaned forward slightly, her eyes soft but probing. And what did she mean by that, Noah? What was she telling you not to say? Noah's little voice trembled. She said not to tell anyone about her or how she knew stuff. She said I'd make Mommy sad. He hesitated, looking up at me briefly, then back down to his lap. She said, "Don't tell your mom. Don't tell her about me, or else." I held my breath, feeling the sharp edge of every word. The thought of someone trying to control my child, to plant fear in him, made something cold twist inside of me. Tessa had done this, made him believe he was in danger if he spoke out. She had used him, manipulated him like he was a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. Gavin's voice suddenly cut through the air, louder than it should have been. He was standing just outside the door, his face leaning around the edge, his body half in the room. "That's not what happened," he said quickly, a forced smile on his lips. "Noah's confused. You're making it worse." I tensed. I knew he'd try to interrupt. He always did. Always took control of the narrative, even when it was clear he was wrong. This time, though, Ms. Rivera wasn't having it. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice a gentle but firm command, "please let Noah speak. We're here to listen to him, not to correct him." There was a brief, stunned silence as Gavin absorbed the words. I could feel his discomfort, his pride wounded, but I didn't take my eyes off Noah. I didn't care what Gavin was doing, not now. The truth was finally starting to come out, and I wasn't about to let anyone stop it. Gavin hesitated, his lips curling into a forced smile. He stepped back from the doorway and Ms. Rivera continued her calm questioning. Noah looked up at her now, more relaxed, more willing to speak. He told her about how Tessa had asked about our home life, our routines, and how she'd seemed to know things that shouldn't have been her business. By the time the interview was over, I felt like I had been holding my breath the whole time. The words Noah had said, his calm, innocent way of speaking, had shattered so many of the lies Gavin had built. He couldn't charm his way out of this. Later that day, Marin sent me an email with urgent updates. She had filed emergency motions, financial restraints, temporary custody protections, and requests for vendor records from the auction. My hands shook as I read through it. I wasn't just fighting for the truth anymore. I was fighting for my life, for Noah's safety, and this time, the legal world was on my side. Pastor Elaine's name appeared in the email, too. Her involvement in the church's internal review of the auction finances. The quiet machinery of the church, the ones who had always turned a blind eye, were finally taking notice. I could feel the shift. Gavin's world was starting to crumble. But there was one thing Gavin didn't know. Something that gave me a quiet power I hadn't realized I had. My late aunt had left me a trust, a small inheritance that had funded much of our comfortable life. Gavin thought he had control over everything, that I was dependent on him. But what he didn't know was that I had already secured my future. I had the financial freedom to stand up to him. Today, I know what I didn't then. Gavin's manipulations weren't as invincible as he thought. The power I had been searching for was always within my reach, and now it was time to use it. The courthouse smelled like cold air and stale coffee, the sterile, almost clinical scent that filled my lungs as I sat in the back of the room. I could hear the soft shuffle of feet, the low murmur of voices that felt too loud, too fake. I tried to steady my breathing as I stared at the polished wood of the courtroom table, my fingers gripping the armrest just a little too tight. The room felt like it was closing in on me, like every inch of space was filled with the weight of what was about to happen. Gavin's attorney stood up, pacing with the kind of confidence that only came from someone who knew how to manipulate words. He was good at it, too, making it sound like everything I had said, everything I had been feeling, was nothing more than hysteria. The tone of his voice was smooth, calculated. "Rachel Hayes," he began, his voice booming in the courtroom, "has been emotionally unstable throughout this entire ordeal. Her reactions, overwhelming at best, cannot be trusted as reliable evidence in this matter." I felt the blood rush to my face, but I forced myself to stay still, emotionally unstable. That was what he had labeled me now, The words stung more than I wanted to admit. They were trying to make me seem weak, fragile, out of control. They were trying to strip me of my power, to paint me as the one who couldn't keep it together. It wasn't the first time they'd done this. Gavin had always minimized my feelings, made me seem like I was the one who needed to be fixed. But this time, I wasn't going to let him. I was done being the one who apologized for being human, for being a mother who was only trying to protect her son. I glanced over at Gavin, who sat at the table with that smug, self-satisfied expression he always wore when he thought he was winning. But I wasn't fooled. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. The mask was slipping, and he knew it. Then Maren stood up. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. She was calm, composed, like she always was. But there was something about her presence that made everything feel like it was finally going to be okay. She didn't rush her words. She didn't need to. She spoke with a quiet authority that made everyone listen. "We have submitted the full evidence," Maren said, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "Here is the template Gavin's team used to paint Mrs. Hayes as unstable. We have a direct link to the vendor he used to bring Tessa into the picture. We have also flagged bank records showing clear evidence of attempted fund diversion. And lastly, Ms. Rivera's findings confirm a coordinated narrative was being built, targeting Mrs. Hayes and her ability to parent." The room fell silent. The lawyer's confident stance faltered for just a moment. I could see it in his eyes, doubt creeping in. The very evidence that Gavin had tried so desperately to bury was now laid out in front of everyone, impossible to ignore. Maren continued, unflinching. "We are also requesting formal investigation referrals tied to allegations of fraud and coercive manipulation." I could feel the weight of those words, the gravity of the accusations. It was no longer just about my personal life. It was about what Gavin had done, how he had manipulated everything for his own benefit. The judge, who had been silent through the exchange, finally spoke, her voice sharp and final. "Temporary orders will be issued immediately. Financial restraints on the respondent's accounts, structured contact with the child, and a formal investigation will begin. I'll also refer this case to the appropriate agencies for review of the fraud and coercive control allegations." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time in months, I felt like I had solid ground beneath my feet. The world I had once known, the world Gavin had built for us, was crumbling piece by piece, and I wasn't the one holding the wrecking ball this time. Then, the bombshell came. The church board had acted quickly. "The church board has removed Mr. Hayes from his financial roles pending further review," the judge stated. The words hit Gavin like a slap in the face. I could see the blood drain from his face, the shock in his eyes. The church, the very institution he had used as his shield, had turned on him. The people who had once trusted him had seen through his mask. And Tessa? Her credibility was shredded. The contractor ties she had with Gavin, her connection to the vendor, the ones who had been funneling money, triggered a level of scrutiny she couldn't talk her way out of. The weight of the evidence had caught up to her, and there was no more pretending she'd been innocent in all of this. I looked at Gavin, his mouth slightly open in disbelief, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside of me. The power, the control he had always wielded over me was slipping, and this time, it was my turn to take back my life. Today, I know what I didn't then. Karma doesn't miss its mark. Gavin thought he could manipulate the truth, paint me as the villain, but in the end, the truth always has a way of finding its way to the surface. And now, he was the one exposed. The small rental was a world away from the house we'd left behind. The walls were thin, and the floors creaked, but there was something comforting about the simplicity of it all. Clean sheets, a kitchen that didn't echo with memories of Gavin's footsteps, and no whispers of his voice in the hall, like a ghost lingering just outside the door. I could breathe here. Noah could breathe here. The first night we stayed, Noah fell asleep in the middle of the bed, his little body curled up under a soft quilt. He looked so small, so vulnerable, but there was a peace in him I hadn't seen in months. The tension had left his face, even if just for a moment. It was a small victory, one I didn't dare take for granted, but the outside world was still pushing in. The next day, a knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Sarah, one of the church's mutual friends. She stood there, awkwardly shifting from one foot to the other, her eyes darting to the side like she wasn't sure how to approach me. "I just wanted to check on you," she said, her voice stiff like she was walking on thin ice. "And, I hope you're doing okay." I forced a smile, though it felt like my skin was too tight. "We're fine," I said, even though nothing felt fine. "It's just new." She nodded, glancing at the door, then back at me. "I've heard. Well, I just wanted to say that maybe you should, keep things private." For Noah's sake. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. The suggestion that my child's well-being was secondary to Gavin's image. Still, after everything he'd done, it cut deeper than I cared to admit. "I'll handle it," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. "We'll be okay." She nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. "I hope so, for Noah, and for Gavin's sake. You don't want to make things harder than they already are." The emphasis on Gavin's sake stung like acid, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Still, it felt like I was swimming against the current. The world outside my door, the people who had stood by Gavin, his people, wanted me to keep quiet, to sweep the truth under the rug, to keep things nice and neat for him. But Noah came first. A few days later, Pastor Elaine stopped by. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, not since the fallout, but there she was, standing on the doorstep, her face softer than I remembered. She didn't say anything at first, just gave me a long, searching look, like she was waiting for me to say something. Anything. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice quiet. "I should have seen it sooner. I didn't realize what Gavin was doing, what he was capable of. I'm sorry I didn't protect you both from the start. I never meant for any of this to happen." The words came from her like a weight had lifted. For a moment, I could almost see the humanity behind her position. I had never expected an apology, not from someone in her position, not after everything had fallen apart. But here it was, an apology that was just for me, just for what had happened to my family, and not for the sake of any public image. "No need to apologize," I said softly. "You couldn't have known." She nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes now, like she saw the whole picture clearer than she had before. "Gavin put on a performance, and you were right to walk away. I just wish I had seen it sooner." That was the first time I felt like I had someone who understood, someone who saw the cost, the emotional price I had paid. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it was enough. Marin, too, had been working behind the scenes. She'd ensured that my paycheck was secure, that no new debts could be placed in my name. The weight of Gavin's financial hold was finally being chipped away. He couldn't control me that way anymore. But it wasn't just about money. It was about rebuilding the trust I had lost, trust in myself, in Noah, and in the world. The first therapy session for Noah came quickly after we moved in. I chose someone I trusted, someone who had experience working with children who'd been through trauma. It wasn't an easy process. He wasn't ready to open up, and I didn't push him. I just let him know I was there, that we were safe now, away from the chaos. After that first session, Noah seemed lighter, even if just for a little while. He came home and said the word safe for the first time in months, and I couldn't help but feel a weight lift off my chest. The word safe had lost its meaning for so long, but now, hearing it from him, it felt real again. Today, I know what I didn't then. Safety isn't just the absence of fear, it's the presence of trust, of peace, of knowing that no one can take that away from you. And for the first time in a long time, Noah and I had both found it. The email came late one evening, the subject line simple but heavy: audit results. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. The words on the screen were straightforward, but the truth behind them hit me like a slap. The payments made to the vendor for the auction weren't directed to charity at all. They were routed to accounts benefiting Gavin. The numbers were clean, pristine even, but they carried a dirty intent. I sat back in my chair, letting the information wash over me. The deception, the manipulation, it all made sense now. Gavin hadn't just used our money for some ill-fated charitable cause. He had used it to control the narrative, to build an image of himself as the savior, while lining his own pockets. He had bought a story, a community's trust, and the silence of those around him. I could feel a cold wave of humiliation creep up my spine. Generosity as a costume. That's what he'd always done. Draped himself in charity and good deeds, while I stood by silently, playing the role of the dutiful wife. My silence had been his tool, his weapon. The way I had stood there, letting him manipulate our lives, pretending it was all fine, that it was all for the greater good. I remembered all the times he had made me feel small, quieting me when I dared question him, telling me I was overthinking, overreacting. All while he built his empire on the backs of lies and deceit. But that was over now. I clicked through the documents. There was no denying it anymore. Gavin's facade was crumbling. I was crumbling it. The legal process had started to close in on him. Marin had worked tirelessly to protect me, to ensure that I was finally free of the financial control Gavin had held over me. The temporary orders had been put in place. Financial separation, custody arrangements that didn't rely on his moods, boundaries that were finally drawn in stone. No more waiting for Gavin's whims, no more being pulled around by his manipulations. I was no longer just his wife. I was a mother, a woman who could stand on her own. The real change, though, came when Tessa faded from our lives. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the public scandal Gavin had been preparing for. No, her exit was quiet, swift, and entirely deserved. The paperwork had been filed, the disqualifications had been signed, and the last trace of her involvement was erased. She couldn't get near us again, not without consequences, not without the world seeing her for what she truly was, just another pawn in Gavin's game. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift off me. Noah began to laugh more. I could hear it clearly, the sound of him giggling as he played with his toys in the living room, his laughter echoing through the small rental. He was laughing in a way that didn't check the room first, a laugh that didn't look to me for reassurance, a laugh that didn't carry the weight of fear or guilt. He was free. We were free. I watched him from the doorway, his little face bright with joy, and something inside of me cracked open. I hadn't realized how much of my own breath had been held, how much of my own life had been on pause. But now we were moving forward. Soft, reflective closure settled on me as I sat down at the kitchen table later that night, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows around the room. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the gaslighting, the manipulation. I thought about the moment Gavin bid $20,000 on the mystery guest, pretending it was a grand gesture of love. It wasn't love, it was a purchase of control, of power over me, over our lives. Now I understand. The moment he made that bid wasn't a display of generosity. It was him cementing his power, buying his way into the narrative. But I had taken that narrative back, piece by piece. And now, the story belonged to me. Today I know what I didn't then. Gavin had never been the one in control. Not really. I was. And I had finally reclaimed my life, my son, and my truth.